China has a new adversary. It's called the Squad, a group of countries led by the US to counter China. But you already have the Quad and the AUKUS for that. So is this just another addition to the alphabet soup of alliances? How will the Squad deter China? And how is Beijing responding? We'll tell you all about it. Meanwhile, Apple has been bit by falling sales and revenue. They blame legal issues and Huawei for it. But could it also be the lack of innovation? We'll discuss that. In West Asia, a new clash. Turkey snaps trade ties with Israel. Israel calls Erdogan a dictator. In Russia, Putin is celebrating reverse migration. Hundreds of thousands of people who'd fled the war have returned home, and it's helping their economy. In Pakistan, the government plans to block your phone SIM card if you don't pay taxes. Not making this up. In the US, over 2,000 people arrested in campus protests. Apparently, most of them are not students. In South Korea, companies will be punished for shrinkflation, meaning selling smaller size of a product for the same price. In India, decoding Rahul Gandhi's decision to contest from Raebareli. In Japan, a bizarre food trend. Armpit rice. That's rice balls made with human sweat from the armpits. No words. And how to make anger work for you. Try it over the weekend. Let us know if it helps. The headlines first. Russian soldiers deployed to an airbase in Niger that also houses American troops. It comes after Niger's junta decided to expel the American forces. Washington pulling out of Niger is a big regional gain for Moscow, which has ramped up its focus on Africa. Trouble mounts for UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. His Conservative Party suffers a major setback in the local elections. The opposition Labour Party wins seats it hasn't held for decades. The results are being seen as a test of public opinion before the general election later this year. Nepal faces widespread internet outages affecting millions of people. The disruptions are due to payments not made to Indian companies. Broadband providers owe more than $20 million to vendors in India. Nepal has over 10 million subscribers to private internet companies. Germany and Czech Republic accuse Russia of multiple cyber attacks. European Union condemns it, warning of a response. Moscow denies the allegations. Recently, EU countries like Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia and Sweden have all been victims of cyber attacks. And Italy bans puppy yoga classes, claims it is too stressful for the animals. The Italian Health Ministry says only adult dogs should be used in animal-assisted therapy. Let me ask you a question. Where would the next big threat to the world, to world peace come from? Will the war in Ukraine spread to Europe? Will West Asia flare up again? Or will it be Africa? What about the Indo-Pacific, where tensions are already high? Earlier this week, there was a significant escalation. We told you about this on the show. China and the Philippines clashed again in the South China Sea or the East Philippine Sea. The Chinese Coast Guard targeted vessels from Manila. They fired water cannons and damaged a Philippine ship. This is becoming a recurring practice. Do you know how many times China has done this year? How many times they've targeted Philippine ships in the last 4 months? At least 20 times. And it's unlikely to stop. So what is the solution? How should one push back against Chinese aggression? The US thinks it has the answer, a new regional alliance. They already have the Quad and the AUKUS, but now they've put together a new group with a brand new name. It's called the Squad. And no, we're not talking about a Hollywood film. This involves actual countries. It's an informal nickname given by Pentagon insiders. 4 countries are members of the Squad: Australia, Japan, the Philippines and the US. And what is the purpose of this alliance? To protect the Indo-Pacific. How would they do that? Well, it's a bit like how a neighborhood watch works. In your apartment complex or your community, you hire a team of security personnel who keep a check on the neighborhood and conduct patrols to keep the residents safe. The Squad is expected to do the same. The Quad has these 3 members plus India. The Squad has the Philippines in India's place. And they're going to maintain freedom of navigation to keep all ships and boats safe. That is their purpose. The squad carried out their first military drills last month. It was a joint maritime patrol, and now they're looking to ramp up these drills. Defense chiefs of the squad met in Hawaii this week.
Just last year in Singapore, the defense ministers from Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and the United States met together for the first time. Today's meeting, the second of its kind, built on that momentum, and it helped advance a vision that our four democracies share for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
He talked about a meeting in Singapore last year. That was the first meeting of the alliance, and now within a year, the squad has reconvened to devise a plan to counter China. There are two elements to their plan. The first is the military drills. They will increase the frequency of such exercises to enhance interoperability, or the ease of working together. The second part is strengthening Manila's defenses. The Philippines wants to modernize its armed forces. It wants to invest $35 billion on defense upgrades over the next decade. Where will the money go? Into buying more ships, aircraft, and radars. And members of the squad want to help Manila. They've agreed to give security assistance. The terms are still being discussed. Needless to say, China is keeping a close eye on all these developments. Before the meeting in Hawaii, the Global Times published an editorial. And in typical fashion, this too sounded like a warning. It says the squad will, and I'm quoting, ultimately lead to a deterioration of the Philippines' strategic security environment. Basically, they're saying the Philippines is making a mistake. The squad will only make the neighborhood more unsafe. That is China's threat/warning. Last month, Beijing complained about the joint military drills too.
Attempts to bring in external forces to safeguard its so-called security will only lead to greater insecurity for itself, potentially turning itself into pawns in others' schemes.
Expect Beijing to keep pushing back. The fact is, China is the aggressor in the South China Sea. It has a massive military presence there. Manila has counted more than 50 Chinese ships and vessels in the West Philippine Sea alone. Taiwan too is on the edge. It says China has turned 3 islands into military bases: the Subi Reef, the Fiery Cross Reef, and the Mischief Reef. They're all close to Taiwan, and Taipei says Chinese bases there are quote-unquote enormous. Now look at these pictures. They were released by Japan in March. What do they show? The Spratly Islands, part of the contested South China Sea. Tokyo says China has taken over 7 facilities there. They're deploying vast military assets and building more bases. China is believed to have 20 outposts in the Paracel Islands too. This is near Vietnam, another party to the South China Sea dispute. So basically, the PLA has surrounded all these regional players, and now it is enforcing its claims by deploying its military. So a response had to come. Conflicts are the reality of our world. So is power asymmetry, which is why alliances become critical in maintaining the balance of power. But the question is, how many alliances do you really need? AUKUS and the Quad were supposed to keep China in check. So far, they've not really delivered. Will the Squad succeed where the others haven't? Guess we'll have to wait and see. It's hard to become number one, but you know what's tougher? Staying at number one. Just ask Apple. They dominated the tech industry for more than a decade. Phones, tablets, laptops, you name it, Apple set the standard. But now the company is struggling. Look at their latest revenue report. From January to March, Apple made $90.8 billion. That's revenue, not profits, $90.8 billion. It was 4% down compared to last year. Most of their products are not selling. iPhone sales are down by 10%. iPad sales have fallen by 17%. And wearable sales are down by 10%. So only 2 bright spots remain. That's services like Apple TV and Apple Music, and their computer, Mac. Everything else is stalling. Do you know what's worse? The global market is not that bad. Globally, smartphone shipments are up by 10%, but iPhone sales are down 10%. So clearly, it's not an industry problem, it's an Apple problem. But why is it happening? A couple of reasons. The first is the slowdown in China. iPhone sales dropped around 8% in China, mostly because of competition. Huawei is eating into Apple's market. Huawei profits surged 560% in the same period, 560%. Another reason is legal troubles. Apple is facing antitrust lawsuits in two key markets, that is Europe and the US. The European Union fined Apple around $2 billion. The US is accusing them of monopolizing the market, and both cases have dented Apple's books. The company says they will turn things around. They have a special event slated for next week. A new iPad is going to be launched, plus the new iPhone will come out later this year. Rumor is it will have a lot of AI magic. If that's the case, maybe Apple can make a comeback. But their struggles do raise some important questions. Like, what does it take to lead an industry? How have other leaders fared? And what role do personalities play? Let's look at examples from the past. The phone market looked very different in the 1990s and 2000s. Nokia was the industry leader. Their peak was around 2008. They made up almost 39% of all mobile phone sales. Samsung was at second place. Now cut to 2012. Samsung overtook Nokia. They had 22% of the market. Nokia had around 19%. So a new industry leader emerged. Again, cut to 2023. This time, Apple overtook Samsung. They had around 20% of the smartphone market. Samsung had 19%. So let's recap this race. From 1998 to 2012, Nokia led the market. From 2012 to 2023, Samsung led the market, and then Apple took over. Nokia's reign lasted around 14 years. Samsung's lasted around 11. Let's look at another industry, photography. For many decades, photography meant one company, Kodak. In 1976, they made up 90% of the US market, 9-0. It was virtually a monopoly. But gradually, competitors emerged like Fujifilm, Nikon, and Canon. By 1999, Kodak's market share was 27%. By 2005, it was 25%. Still, Kodak was a market leader. That would only change in 2010 when Canon overtook them. Today, Canon makes up almost 50% of the digital camera market, and Kodak, they filed for bankruptcy in 2012. So Kodak's reign lasted for more than 2 decades, but it was not a thriving reign, it was a slow death. Another example is Blockbuster, a movie rental chain in the US. Their first shop opened in 1985, and in 20 years, they had 9,000 locations. Blockbuster dominated the US entertainment industry, but in 2010, they went bust. They were swamped by the OTT wave. The likes of Netflix and Amazon swept them aside. So Blockbuster reigned for around 2 decades. Do you know what's common about all these 3 examples? Innovation, or the lack of it. Nokia could not innovate, not like Samsung and Apple did. These companies brought touchscreens and high-quality cameras. So Nokia lost its crown. Kodak also could not innovate. While others moved to digital cameras, Kodak was still stuck with films. By the time they transitioned, it was too late. Same with Blockbuster. They did not ride the digital wave. In the year 2000, in fact, Netflix asked Blockbuster to buy them out, and that too for just $50 million, but Blockbuster denied. Today, Netflix is worth $240 billion. It tells a story, doesn't it? To lead an industry, you need to stay ahead of the curve. You need to keep evolving. Experts say technology doubles every 2 years. For example, cameras become twice as good in 2 years. Processors become twice as good in 2 years. So do touchscreens and batteries. If you don't keep up, you will be outdated. In 10 years' time, you will be a generation behind the rest. Which also brings us to leadership. Do personalities play a role here? Yes, they do. Being a manager is one thing. Being a visionary is another. Just look at Steve Jobs. He wanted to disrupt the mobile phone industry. He made technology look like magic, which is why Apple moved up the ladder. But today, that magic is missing. Tim Cook took over as Apple's CEO in 2011. Listen to an interview he gave around that time. And I'm going to quote, "We argue and debate like crazy about what we are going to do, because we know that we can only do a few things great. That means not doing a bunch of things that would be really good and really fun." There are 2 ways of looking at it. First, Tim Cook is a steady hand. He has looked after the bottom line. He's expanded to new markets. He's also kept shareholders happy, which is all true. But at what cost? He himself said that Apple is not doing a bunch of things that would be really good. Is that trade-off affecting Apple? Perhaps it is. And it also tells you why leadership matters, because leaders give you direction. They decide what the company will focus on, consolidation or innovation. Apple reached the top by innovating. Their focus on consolidation could be their downfall. Now let's come back to the topic of conflicts. The one in West Asia is reshaping regional and global equations. Countries are snapping ties with Israel. The latest to join this list is Turkey. It has suspended trade ties, citing the quote-unquote tragedy in Gaza. Ankara says it will resume trade only when Israel allows free flow of aid into Gaza.
Tüm Batı İsrail'e çalışıyor.
All of the West is working for Israel. Starting with America, they are all working for Israel. All these means are being mobilized to unfortunately condemn the waifs and strays, poor and have-not people of Palestine to death in the face of Israel's bombs. We could not have remained patient in the face of these, so we took our steps. There was a trade volume of $9.5 billion between us. We closed this door, pretending this trade volume does not exist. May it go well from now on.
Ve adımlarımızı attık.
Israel was quick to fire back. Leading the charge was their foreign minister, who compared Erdogan to a dictator. It sounds like a dramatic escalation, but they would be used to it by now, because Turkey and Israel have a complicated relationship. They blow hot and cold. In 2010, Turkey broke diplomatic ties with Israel. In 2016, relations improved, but it did not last. In 2018, they expelled each other's diplomats over the killing of Palestinians. In 2022, things looked up again. When the Turkish economy was struggling, Erdogan needed a boost, so he hosted Israel's president, also Israel's then Prime Minister, Yair Lapid. So the two countries were warming up to each other. As a result, trade improved. Between 2018 and 2022, Turkish exports to Israel doubled. In 2023, bilateral trade was worth $7 billion. Turkey was Israel's 13th biggest export market. Israel was Ankara's 5th biggest source of imports, so things were going well. Then came October 7th. Hamas attacked Israel. West Asia plunged into war. In the early days, Erdogan was more measured. He urged restraint. He offered to mediate. Turkey had ties with Hamas. They also had a relationship with Israel, so Erdogan thought he was the best suited to play peacemaker. He pushed for a political solution to the crisis. But then his tone changed. He branded Israel as a terrorist state. He hit out at Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and compared him to Hitler. He also called Netanyahu the butcher of Gaza. Erdogan was mostly playing to the galleries. His political base at home is Islamist. It is pro-Palestinian. So when the death toll in Gaza rose, he had to speak out. But most of it was rhetoric. It did not really lead to any change on the ground. Diplomatic relations remained intact and trade continued between the two countries. Then came the local elections in March in Turkey. Erdogan's AKP party suffered its worst defeat in 2 decades. Why? Because they lost out on religious voters. The traditional voter base of Erdogan's party had shifted. They voted for the Islamist New Welfare Party, a party that has called for harsh measures against Israel. Of course, this defeat was a setback for Erdogan. He was trying to balance domestic politics with international relations. The outcome was far from ideal. So he's changed tack now and made a complete U-turn. Last month, Erdogan imposed trade restrictions on Israel. Export of 54 products was restricted. And this month, Turkey has joined South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice.
In accordance with the political decision taken, I would like to announce here for the first time that we, as Turkey, have decided to formally intervene in the legal case filed by South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice.
And now a complete breakdown of trade ties. It tells you about Erdogan's strategy. When the war broke out, he eyed a bigger role in West Asia, the role of a peacemaker and a regional leader. It did not work out for him. He fell off that diplomatic tightrope, so now he is opting for the other road. And he's not the only one doing this. More and more countries are cutting ties with Israel for different reasons. Colombia did it today. It ended all diplomatic relations with Israel. Bolivia has done the same. Other countries have not gone as far as severing ties, but they've withdrawn diplomats, like South Africa, Bahrain, Chile, Honduras, and Jordan. When Hamas attacked Israel, the world was on their side. They condemned the attack and pledged solidarity with Israel. But over 200 days later, the sentiment has clearly shifted, and Israel finds itself more and more isolated in the world. Now let's look at Russia. Things have been chaotic in the country for a while. It has been at war for over 2 years against its neighbor Ukraine. Ukraine is backed by almost every Western country. The West keeps imposing sanctions on Russia and anyone working with Russia. What has been the result?
Despite the unprecedented challenges we faced over the past few years, positive trends are strengthening in the domestic economy. As you know, Russia's GDP increased by 3.6% last year, and the statistics for the first months of this year show that it continues to show good rates.
That was Russian President Vladimir Putin. He was speaking at a business forum a few days ago. He expects decent economic growth this year as well, following the 3.6% growth seen in 2023. And this isn't Putin throwing some unverified numbers around. Western institutions have given similar reports, 3.6% growth in 2023. That's for Russia, 3.6%, despite an ongoing war. And it's about to get better for Russia. This year, they're expected to grow faster than all advanced economies, even the US. What is fueling this rapid growth? The war economy, a military-industrial complex working on overdrive. But another factor is also playing a part: the return of Russian nationals. People who fled the country are making their way back home. Back in 2022, when the Ukraine war began, thousands of people fled Russia. Some took the first flights out of Moscow or St. Petersburg. Others left by road, crossing into neighboring countries like Georgia or Kazakhstan. The people fleeing were often military-aged men who were afraid of getting conscripted. But there were others too, people who disagreed with the war, who ideologically opposed Putin. They thought they would flee rather than live under him any longer. And at that time, Putin had described them, and I'm quoting, he called them scum and traitors. More than 1 million people left Russia in 2022. First in February, when the war was announced, and then in September, when Putin mobilized 300,000 reservists. Most of the people who left were relatively young, of fighting age, but this also means that they were also working age. So a chunk of Russia's workforce fled the nation in 2022. They could have contributed to the economy had they stayed. Their absence slowed Russia's growth down. But now things have changed. These Russians are going back home. There are a number of reasons for that. Some could not make a living abroad. They tried to start afresh, it did not work out, so they went back. Others are being forced to go back. Their resident permits have been expiring and countries are wary about reviewing them. Even places that initially welcomed Russians, like Turkey. At present, there are about 60,000 Russians in Turkey. In 2022, the number was as high as 132,000 Russians. Less than half the Russians who went to Turkey have remained after 2 years. And this is the case in a lot of countries, even friendly ones like Armenia or Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan had 146,000 Russians in 2022. By the end of last year, about 80,000 remained. That number would have gone down further in the last 4 months. So it seems that some host countries have been pressuring Russians to go back home. That's the second reason why they're heading home. There's also a third reason: discrimination. Think about the war in Ukraine. Think about how it has been portrayed. Putin versus the West, Russia against the free world, dictatorship versus democracy. That has been the narrative in large parts of the world, and this shapes perceptions. Even about ordinary Russian people, people who have nothing to do with the war, who actually ran away from it. About 25% of these Russians say they face discrimination from the people of the country they fled to or from governments or other institutions. This Russophobia has jaded some of the people who left. So they have made their way back home and caused Russia's reverse migration, which is helping the country. The returning Russians are contributing to the economy again at a higher rate than those who stayed behind. So their return is a boon for Putin, and it marks another failure of the West's policy towards Russia. Now let's look at Pakistan. India's noisy neighbor is making headlines again. It's about a financial matter, not your usual loan or default news. This time it's actually something unique. Pakistan has issued an ultimatum to about 500,000 tax defaulters in the country. They have been told to pay up or their mobile SIM cards will be deactivated. Now this is a new strategy. Clear your dues or lose calling privileges. Considering how essential phones have become, the tactic may actually work. But is it really the way to go about tax collection? Our next report has the details.
Islamabad has come up with an innovative solution to address its financial problems. Much like a broke mobster who can't afford bullets, Pakistan is coming up with creative ways to shake down the public. It's using a new weapon against tax defaulters, the threat of disconnection. If the people of Pakistan don't pay their taxes, their SIM cards will get blocked. It's taxes for TikTok, income tax for Instagram. Pakistan's new tax collection drive puts connectivity on the line. Here's how it works. Pakistan's Federal Board of Revenue has identified about 2.4 million tax defaulters. The tax authority shortlisted about 500,000 of them, people who didn't pay taxes last year but had paid at least once in the past 3 years. These 500,000 flaky taxpayers were chosen for the new punishment. Their names were sent to Pakistan's Telecom Authority and to the 4 telecom providers in the country. The telecom providers have been handed instructions. They are to disconnect SIM cards that belong to the defaulters. They need to do this by the 15th of May. Now, this isn't permanent. If the defaulters pay their taxes, their SIMs will start working again. It may take a few days, but every week the telecom operators will receive a list of the people who have cleared their dues, and the operators can restore their connections. That is how the new collection drive will work if it gets off the ground. The telecom companies aren't happy with the plan. They don't want to lose their customers, even temporarily. So the new plan could be challenged in court. But if it gets the legal nod, the tactic could change the face of Pakistan's revenue collections. Because threats like this work in the country. Pakistani SIM cards were at risk in 2021 as well, during the COVID-19 pandemic. Pakistan is notoriously anti-vaccine, even when it comes to basic vaccines like the one for polio. Many in Pakistan refused to take the COVID jab when it came out. So states like Punjab and Sindh threatened anti-vaxxers with disconnection. The plan worked. Pakistan's vaccine rate got a shot in the arm. People didn't care about COVID, but they didn't want to lose their calling services. So the SIM severance scheme has worked in the past. But this isn't always the case, at least in other countries. Nigeria tried something similar a few months ago. People were told to link their SIM cards to their national identity numbers. They were also threatened with disconnection. But in Nigeria, it seems that threat didn't really work. People allowed their SIMs to get blocked, especially if they were secondary SIMs. Who's to say that won't happen in Pakistan? After all, a new SIM may cost less than clearing all the taxes. But even if it works, even if it is a successful scheme, should this be allowed? What happens if the government gets it wrong? If they target the wrong person? A mobile phone connection is crucial in this day and age. It could cost someone their daily bread and butter, maybe more. Blocking a SIM card is a drastic step. So, should governments be allowed to weaponize it?
Vantage continues after a short break.
Filing this report, because it could be a possibility that this report might not have gone to the Chief Minister. Otherwise, this report would have been shelved. And there could be a possibility again that this report may be again called for review.
Okay, 1 second. Ajay, look, I want to go across
because this is going to be a backlash for them.
Yeah, certainly this is going to be an embarrassment for the kind of sweeping statements that were made on the back of this very tragic case that had triggered nationwide protests over alleged discrimination against him in university and other Dalits in universities. Now, in a closure report submitted to the Telangana High Court, the state police has said that Rohit was actually not a Dalit and that he died or killed himself because he was afraid of his real caste identity coming out. My colleague Swastika Das is joining us. Swastika, this was a very contentious case, but the findings or the conclusion report is going to be a complete departure from what the politics on the case was.
It is a complete departure from what transpired back in 2016, this particular case which triggered nationwide outrage against then HRD Minister Smriti Irani, Bandanu Dattatreya, Appa Rao, who was then VC of HCU. What the Cyberabad Telangana police rather has put in its report is that A, they have found no evidence with the fact that Rohit Vemula died by suicide because of being a Dalit and was being targeted upon that. And the bigger fact than that is that the report clearly mentions Rohit Vemula was not a Dalit and that he was a converted Dalit, meaning his mother claimed that she hailed from the Dalit community, a Mala community, but she was married to a person who hailed from the OBC community. And therefore, they allegedly forged documents to show that Rohit Vemula was a Dalit. This definitely is a damning report. Rohit Vemula's family in various media interviews have told that they don't accept it. They say this is an atrocious report by the Telangana government, and in all likelihood, they're also likely to meet the Chief Minister of Telangana, Revanth Reddy. They've called this report as a forged report by the Telangana police, but the closure report in itself, which has been filed before the court, says otherwise. It clearly says that Rohit Vemula was not a Dalit, and therefore the suicide that triggered nationwide protests was not because of the fact that he was a Dalit, that he was targeted for being.
That was the University of California. Police entered the campus on Thursday. They cleared out most of the protesters. We showed you the pictures yesterday. A lot of flashbangs, tear gas and batons. So now the focus is on the police action. Was it excessive? And did it lead to any injuries? We're hearing conflicting reports. The protesters say they were beaten up by the cops, but the police say it was a minor pushback.
I was on the front lines. I was, the cops hit me with their batons and they grabbed me. I did not resist arrest, but they grabbed me and I said, okay, at this point, the bets are off. The school rather physically intimidate their students, eventually hurt their students, rather than even consider divestment.
We consider it a successful, incident. We didn't see no injuries on both ends. Our officers were able to remove the agitators. We're still working on a few agitators that are still on campus. However, we are making progress.
The crackdown isn't over though. Some protesters remain on the UCLA grounds. They're facing off with the police, so another showdown could be looming. Plus, there are operations elsewhere, like at Portland University. Protesting students had occupied a library there, so the cops charged into the campus. Take a look. Many colleges have done the same. They've asked local police to clear the protesters. Around 2,200 arrests have been made so far. 2,200 arrests. But are all of them students? According to the police, no. They say 29% of those arrested at Columbia were not from that college. At the City College of New York, it was 60%, 60. So where did these people come from? The police haven't said yet. Neither has the mayor of New York. He said this week that outside actors were involved, but he won't say who those actors are. Are they students from other colleges? Are they political groups? Or is there something bigger at play? There is simply no clarity. But you won't see such scenes in the Arab world. There are dozens of colleges in countries like Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Egypt. Why are students not protesting there? Out of fear. Their regimes are pro-Palestine, but they frown upon protests. Most Gulf states have banned public demonstrations. You need the regime's permission to protest. Plus, being arrested in Saudi Arabia is not like being arrested in New York. The consequences are very different. So you'll see a lot of anger on Arab social media, but very few college protests. Elsewhere, that's not the case though. Look at the scenes in Australia. Students at the University of Sydney are protesting. They too have set up tents. Same scenes in Mexico. Pro-Palestine students have set up tents in the capital. They're showing solidarity with their American peers. And in France, things got physical. Students at Sciences Po occupied the college building, so riot cops were called in. Take a look. Much smaller protests than the US, also less violence, so I guess there is a different way to protest. Speaking of which, a new protest symbol is spreading in the US. You may expect something sophisticated, but it's not. It's a water jug. And the origin story is quite interesting. Last month, police entered a college in California. They tried to clear out the protesting students, but some of them pushed back. How? Using an empty water jug. Since then, it has gone viral. Students are carrying up empty water jugs to protest. They're making songs and memes about it. I know it all sounds very funny, but the situation is still tense. Hundreds of protesters remain in colleges around the US. Will all of them be dragged away? Is there no better solution? Well, there could be. A few colleges have resolved the protests peacefully. How? By striking a deal with students. 4 colleges have done this so far. Rutgers University in New Jersey, University of Minnesota, Northwestern University in Illinois, and Brown University in Rhode Island. Each of these deals are different. Let's look at the latest one in Rutgers. Students had a total of 10 demands, like divesting from Israel and cutting ties with the Tel Aviv University, also accepting displaced students from Gaza and displaying flags of Palestine on campus. The college has agreed to 8 out of 10 demands. The 2 important ones were not accepted: divesting from Israel and cutting ties with Tel Aviv University. Yet the students disbanded. At the University of Minnesota, it took even less. The college president agreed to meet the students, so the protest was called off. At Northwestern, the college promised a few concessions, like a community house for West Asian students and funding for Palestinian students. So clearly, there is a better way. But we need both sides to climb down. Students must ask for things that are deliverable and, of course, follow the law. You can't just hold the entire college hostage. Same for the administrators. They must try to reach out to the students, offer them some sort of concessions. If not, this could drag on for a long time. There are protest encampments at 80 American colleges. Imagine a police operation in all of them, 80 colleges. It would be traumatic and unnecessary. So let's hope that common sense prevails on both sides. Our next story is about your shopping bag, more specifically your groceries and household items. Have you ever felt that your favorite products are shrinking in size? Does that bag of chips appear smaller than before? Does the detergent pack feel less heavy? The packaging looks the same, the price is the same, but you're getting less for it. If you've noticed or felt this, you're not alone. Companies across the world are doing it, reducing the size of the product while selling it at the same price. They call it shrinkflation. And as consumers, we have no choice but to accept it, unless you're in South Korea. Because here a crackdown is underway. Seoul is going after the manufacturers who are shrinking their products without informing their consumers. Here's a report.
A visit to the supermarket can be a confusing experience. There is more of everything. Look on any shelf and you'll be spoiled for choice. There is an explosion of brands across product categories. If you fancy an ice cream, just going through the section can feel like navigating your way through a maze. There's a vast selection of brands offering dozens of flavors, and they come in different versions too, like sugar-free options and even vegan ice creams. Having options is a good thing, but as you ponder over the endless choices, your wallet may be quietly taking a hit. Companies around the world have a sneaky way to make you pay more for less product. This tactic is called shrinkflation. Some of the world's most famous brands have resorted to it, like Listerine. In the UK, Listerine reduced the size of its mouthwash bottle. Earlier, it was sold in a 600 ml bottle, but now buyers will get just 500 ml. In the US, a variant of Oreo cookies was downsized by over 50 grams, and Huggies reduced the number of its diapers by 12. They weren't the only ones. From coffee brands to household cleaning supplies and snacks, all have reduced the sizes of their products without lowering the price. Even Joe Biden can't ignore it anymore.
Sports drinks bottles are smaller. A bag of chips has fewer chips, but they're still charging it just as much. I've had enough of what they call shrinkflation.
The American president wants companies to stop shrinking products. Meanwhile, South Korea is taking more decisive action. Seoul has made some new rules. They want companies to tell shoppers if they reduce the size of their products. If they don't comply, they'll be forced to pay a fine. How much is the penalty? 10 million won, or around $7,300. These orders have been issued by the Fair Trade Commission. This is South Korea's antitrust regulator. They say shrinkflation is unfair to consumers. Their instructions to manufacturers are specific and strict. If they reduce the size of a product, they'll have to put a label on it for at least 3 months. The label should clearly mention the changes in size or weight. France is adopting similar rules as well. Last month, the French Finance Ministry issued guidelines. If a seller cuts the size of a product without reducing the price, they'll have to declare it. Again, retailers have been asked to stick a label on the product for 2 months. The new rules will kick in from July. Shrinkflation is frustrating for consumers, especially now when inflation continues to erode savings across many parts of the world. The last thing anyone needs is to feel cheated at the grocery store.
All the speculation is over. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi will fight from a second seat, but it's not Amethi. Rahul Gandhi has gone with Rai Bareli. Now, both these seats are symbolic. They're located in the state of Uttar Pradesh and they have long-standing ties to the Gandhi family. So the assumption was that both siblings would fight. Priyanka Gandhi from Rai Bareli, Rahul Gandhi from Amethi. But the Congress had other plans. Priyanka is not being fielded at all and Rahul Gandhi has ditched Amethi for Rai Bareli. He filed his nomination earlier today. He was accompanied by the party president and his family. But why is this significant? Because of the messaging. Rahul Gandhi made his electoral debut in 2004 and he did so from Amethi. He won the same seat in 2009 and 2014, but in the last election he lost that seat. Back then, Rahul Gandhi had promised to win back Amethi to return 5 years later. Instead, he has shifted to another seat. So the BJP is having a field day. Prime Minister Modi accused Rahul Gandhi of running from a fight.
मैंने पहले ही बता दिया था कि शाहजादे वायनाड में हारने वाले हैं और हार के डर से जैसे ही वायनाड में मतदान समाप्त होगा वो दूसरी सीट खोजने लग जाएंगे और अब दूसरी सीट पर भी उनके सारे चेले चपाटे कह रहे थे अमेठी आएंगे, लेकिन अमेठी से भी इतना डर गए, इतने डर गए, वहां से भागकर अब रायबरेली में खोज रहे हैं रास्ता.
Couple of questions here. First, why Raebareli instead of Amethi? And second, why contest at all? Rahul Gandhi is already fighting from another seat in Kerala. It's a long-standing Congress stronghold, so victory is pretty much assured. Why then did he pick a second seat? Let's look at both these questions. Raebareli has long been dominated by the Gandhi family. In 1952, it was won by Firoz Gandhi. That's Rahul's grandfather. Indira Gandhi won the seat in 1967, 1971 and 1980. Then in 2004, Sonia Gandhi won the seat. She was re-elected in 2009, 2014 and 2019. That last victory was very important because the Congress party managed only one seat in Uttar Pradesh, and that one seat was Raebareli. So long story short, it's a safe bet. The Congress party has won by more than 160,000 votes in 2019. So Rahul Gandhi had a good chance. Certainly better than Amethi. He lost that seat. He lost Amethi by more than 55,000 votes last time. So clearly he wasn't confident about it, which brings us to the second question. Why contest at all? Because of the symbolism. Uttar Pradesh has around 80 seats in the Lok Sabha. That's almost 15% of the total. Politically, it's a very important state, probably the most important one. So contesting from there is a political statement, sort of like leading from the front or fighting where the action is thick. But will it actually work? There are 4 factors to note here. First, it's still a risky move. I know we said Raebareli is a safe seat, but elections are tricky affairs. The Congress has already been routed from the Hindi heartland. So a loss in Raebareli is not impossible. If that happens, it would be a double whammy. Rahul could become the leader who lost both his family bastions, first Amethi, then Raebareli, and there is an element of risk there. Secondly, what sort of message does it send? We know that Rahul Gandhi has prime ministerial ambitions, yet he can't fight for his old seat. The Congress has nurtured Rahul's image as a fighter, but this move suggests the very opposite, that he is not ready for a tough fight, and chances are that will hurt the morale of his party workers. Thirdly, what about Priyanka Gandhi? In the last few years, she has led the campaign in Raebareli. Sonia Gandhi's health did not allow her to campaign, so the Congress deployed her daughter. We keep hearing about her looming electoral debut. Well, this was the perfect chance, but the party decided otherwise. And finally, the fourth factor. What about his seat in Wayanad? Assuming that he wins both, Rahul is expected to drop Wayanad. The people there may not like that. They voted him to the Lok Sabha when Amethi did not. And how does he repay them? By picking another seat. So there's a lot of factors at play here. But we'll have to wait and see how things play out. Raebareli will be voting in the 5th phase of the elections, that's on the 20th of May. And when the results come in, we'll see if this move worked or not. Have you heard of onigiri? It's a Japanese snack, almost 100 years old. But the country is giving it a new twist. It's adding a secret ingredient, human sweat. You heard that right. Young women are shaping onigiri balls under their armpits. These sell for 10 times the price of normal onigiri. And it's not even the worst bizarre delicacy. There are far worse ones. I know it is dinner time for many of our viewers, so maybe put down that plate for this next story. And trust me, you'll thank us later.
Onigiri. It's a Japanese staple. You take some sort of meat and vegetables, shape rice around it, and then that's wrapped in seaweed. All of this is done by hand. The dish is portable, easy to eat, and the Japanese love it. But the beloved Japanese dish is getting a new twist. A secret sauce, if you could say so. Human sweat. You heard that right. Maybe Japan decided, The dish needed some umami. So, they're utilizing the natural umami essence of sweat glands. The dish is being prepared by young women. They use their armpits to roll the balls. First, they are completely disinfected. Then, these women exercise. This is to produce the sweat, the master ingredient. And finally, they get down to rolling the balls. They use their armpits instead of their palms. The finished product is apparently a delicacy. It sells for ridiculous prices, almost 10 times that of a normal onigiri. Of course, the reactions have been quite mixed. One diner said it tasted no different, but others have some questions. Why it was needed in the first place? Plus, what about hygiene? What if the person making it was sick? Will you follow after eating it then? But sweat isn't even remotely the worst thing in food. There have been far worse. Take tongsul, for example. It's a Korean rice wine. But here's the catch. Apparently, IT uses the feces of a human child to ferment the wine. If you are already grossed it, trust me, there's more. In China, they have something called virgin boy eggs. It's a traditional dish of dongyang. How's it made? To make this dish, you need eggs and urine. Yes, urine. The eggs are boiled in the urine of young boys, preferably under the age of 10. Thus the name, virgin boy eggs. And it's not all just savory treats. There are some sweet ones too. Like this bizarre flavor of ice cream in London. It was all the rage, and even sold out in days. But IT wasn't your original ice cream. It was breast milk ice cream. 15 women produced milk to make the first batch. The store founder said, "If it's good enough for our kids, it's good enough to become ice cream." Clearly, these dishes are not for the faint-hearted. It's one thing to search for flavor in your food, but it's another if that flavor comes from the human body. Whether you're a staunch traditionalist or an adventurous Epicurean, one thing's for sure, you'll never look at food the same way again.
Vantage continues after a short break.
The biggest point after this is the fact that the report clearly mentions Rohit Vemula was allegedly afraid of revealing his caste status, and therefore to avoid any kind of backlash, he died by suicide. There are other reasons that have also been investigated upon, but it clearly says he was not targeted because he is not from Dalit community.
No, this is going to be extremely important, not just because of the kind of protests and allegations that swirled around at that time, but we are in election season. And, you're going to have elections in states like Andhra and Telangana soon. But I just want to ask you, Swastika, what are the initial reactions you're getting after this closure report has been filed?
Well, the BJP leader spoke to Ramchandra Rao, who was also named as an accused initially, says that this comes as the fact that truth has prevailed. You've seen Amit Malviya also tweet the same. And this is a big victory in the sense for the BJP, because back in 2016, when Smriti Irani was the HRD minister, she faced a lot of backlash. Bandaru Dattatreya, who was the Secunderabad MP, was also came under fire. In fact, you had Rahul Gandhi, Arvind Kejriwal, all the leaders from the opposition come down to Hyderabad Central University, and it was a story that created ripples across the country. The narrative that Rohit Vemula was in fact attacked, targeted, and selectively picked because he was Dalit, which forced him allegedly to die by suicide, is something that now stands completely nullified by this report, which clearly says that they are closing the case on the grounds that there is no evidence, and the biggest factor in that is the fact that Rohit Vemula was allegedly not a Dalit, and that his family forged documents to show that he was from a Dalit community.
Okay, Swastika, I want you to just stay with me, because this is a sensational closure report that has been filed on what was a sensational case at the time. If you remember, this rocked Parliament for many, many days. The HRD minister at that time, Smriti Irani, was put in the dock and was personally blamed for the death of Rohit Vemula. I have Ajay Alok, national spokesperson of the BJP, actually joining us. Ajay Alok, I do thank you for joining us on short notice. Again, your first response on this massive closure disclosure report that has been filed, it puts everyone in the clear, but more importantly, it brings out facets that may be a little bit ugly, but as per the closure report, the reasons for the suicide were completely different.
No, of course, we have all the sympathy for Rohit Vemula because he was a young, promising guy, and any youngster committing suicide is not good for the country. That we firmly believe.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Vietnam, millions of fish die as heat wave continues to roast the country. In Russia, the army parades military hardware in central Moscow ahead of a nighttime rehearsal. And Australia has launched a new rocket fueled by candle wax. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected as the Prime Minister of the UK. She was the country's first female Prime Minister, the first woman to lead a major Western power, and also the longest serving British Prime Minister in 150 years. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.
Yes, Parliament was rocked, like what you said, but it was rocked by on whose behest? It was again this Jhutha Gandhi, this Rahul Gandhi, Ranchod Gandhi. He made all these things happen. He made an issue out of nothing. And today in Telangana, when Telangana police have filed this closure report, we don't have the government there. Earlier also we were not in the part of the government. It was KCR's government. So we are nowhere connected there. Justice has prevailed and truth has prevailed. And it has been proved that these people always create false narrative and they thrive on it. That they did 5-7 years back. Today also they are doing the same thing. Their habits do not change. They are of the same metal and they have the same thing. And even at the cost of a suicide of a young boy, they can create politics. My heart goes out to Rohit Vemula and his family for what he has done. It doesn't matter anymore that whether he was a Dalit, he was not a Dalit. That's not a question altogether. The question is, youngster of this country committing a suicide is a blot to the nation. That you have to understand if you are sensitive and human enough. But these people are absolutely insensitive, inhuman, and they want to make